So let's put some of these patterns into practice with example 1. Alright, so the verb for example 1 is expand and then simplify. So part A, we have x minus 2 all squared. So think about the three patterns. Is it pattern number 1, pattern number 2, or pattern number 3? Is it the perfect squares with the addition? Is it perfect squares with the subtraction? Or is it the difference of perfect squares? Well, you see here that it's one bracket all squared, so it's a perfect square. We see inside that there's a minus sign, so it's pattern number 2. So matching up pattern number 2, my x is my a, my 2 is my b. So I can just jump straight to the pattern, which is if it's a minus b all squared, then I get a squared, so that's x squared, minus 2 lots of a, which is x, lots of b, which is 2, and then we add on b squared, which is 2, so that gives us x squared minus 4x plus 4. Right, so let's do part B. B says let's expand and simplify brackets 2a plus 3 all squared. So matching up with your patterns, is it pattern number 1, 2, or 3? Well, it's one bracket all squared, so it's either pattern number 1 or pattern number 2. It's a perfect square. Now look at the sign inside, it's a plus, so it's pattern number 1. So our first term is 2a, our second term b is 3. So jumping straight to the pattern, a plus b all squared is a squared plus 2ab plus b squared. So that gives us a squared, so 2a all squared, plus 2 lots of the first thing, 2a, lots of the second thing, plus the second thing all squared. So 2a all squared gives us 4a squared. Be careful of this 2a squared. A lot of people will just write 2a squared when it's not. It's 4a squared because 2 squared is 4. Now 2 times 2 times 3 is 12a, and 3 squared is 9. And that's all it can be simplified to. Let's do another one. Let's do part C. Let's do a 3x minus 2y times 3x plus 2y. So again, let's match up our patterns. Does it look like pattern 1, 2, or 3? Well, it's not a one bracket or square, so it's not pattern 1 or pattern 2. Is it in the form of something plus another thing times something minus that same thing? So it's in the form of plus and minus. Yes, we've got the opposite signs and then the same 3x in each bracket and the same 2y in each bracket. So it's a difference of perfect squares. The pattern for difference of perfect squares says that it ends up being first thing all squared, take away second thing all squared in your brackets. So our first thing is 3x, our second thing is 2y. So the pattern says this is the same as the first thing squared. Make sure you put brackets because you're squaring everything. And then it was a squared minus b squared. So it's the subtract second thing, which is 2y all squared. Don't forget brackets because you're squaring everything. 3 squared is 9. X squared minus 4 y squared because 2 squared is 4. So today's lesson, the point of today's lesson is see if you can recognize these expansion patterns of a plus b all squared, a minus b all squared, or a plus b times a minus b, where the signs are different, are opposite to each other, but the first is the same and the second item is the same. Now, because you're in year 9, if you're a little stuck in memorizing these patterns, it's still actually okay to use the FOIL method to actually answer A, B, and C in this example. Because, I mean, if you go back to part A, if you couldn't recognize, if you couldn't remember the pattern of what a minus b all squared was, you really could just go, well, I know x minus 2 all squared means x minus 2 times x minus 2, because it's multiplying by itself, because that's what squared means. And then you could just apply FOIL like you did last lesson to get first times outer times inner times your last. So minus 2 times minus 2 gives you a plus 4. And then you simplify that, so you get x squared minus 4x plus 4. And hey presto, you get the exact same answer as you would by memorizing the patterns. So I guess if you're not sure or not confident in memorizing these patterns, you can at the end still use your FOIL method to expand these brackets. But it is highly recommended that you do your best to memorize these patterns because you'll need it in grade 10. So just to make sure we can actually still use FOIL for part C, say for example, you can, if you can't memorize these patterns, that's okay. As long as you can expand brackets and FOIL it, then it's all good. Because if you FOIL part C, your first is 3x times 3x, which gives you 9x squared. Then you go outer, so 3x times 2y gives you positive 6xy. Inner gives you negative 2y times 3x, gives you negative 6xy. And finally, your last is minus 2y times positive 2y gives you negative 4y squared. So because you have plus 6y and minus 6y, they cancel each other. So really you're left with 9x squared minus 4y squared, which is the same as what the pattern you memorized was. So if you can't memorize the pattern, that's okay. As long as you know how to expand brackets using FOIL, last lesson's method, then you're good for your Year 9 exam. But you really should try your best to memorize these three, or to recognize these three patterns. Number one, your perfect squares, a plus b all squared. It gives you first thing squared plus 2 lots of the first thing times the second thing plus your second thing all squared. Or the a minus b all squared gives you a squared minus 2ab plus b squared. Or if you have the pattern of opposite signs, plus minus, and then you have the first things the same and the second things the same, then you get a squared minus b squared.